if you need to be a guru, just grab your invisible wand and just boop yourself in the head and go, okay, I'm a consultant now.
What's one of the biggest lessons you've learned about yourself with podcasting, but also what typically people in general struggle with?
Overcoming imposter syndrome. Because that's really it's not the technology or the budget that stops most people. It's the thing between our ears. It is something that I just was like, well, who's going to listen to me? It's not a matter of like, what's the one strategy? It's how many strategies can I have? Because the more hoses that are going into the pool, the quicker it fills up.
Podpage is some of the website stuff that you're working on. And you mentioned in your breakdown a couple times too, the importance of people being able to go to a website to support.
Yeah, Podpage will build a website for you, basically from your feed in about 10 minutes.
I like to call those full circle moments where 99.9% of the time you don't get to hear back about it, but it doesn't mean it's not happening.
You don't monetize a podcast, you monetize an audience. You have to solve a problem or help them in some way or another. So that's the thing. So really focus on
welcome back, y'all. Thanks so much for being here listening to UPBEAT. I'm your host, Parker Kane. We've got an incredible guest on the show today. I'm so excited to introduce you to him. His name is Dave Jackson. Before we hit record, called him a legend, and he said that was maybe a little bit too nice or genuine of me. And I'm like, no, genuinely, I think you are a legend in the podcasting space. And so I'm glad that he's here today. Dave, how's it going, man?
Parker, glad to be here. Yes, the legend, Dave Jackson, is on the microphone. So yeah, that's funny. But glad to be here.
Absolutely. I'm glad you're here too. And I do think you're a legend. You've been podcasting, since 2005?
2005, back when we would chisel the podcast out of granite. And yeah, it was not fun back then. My favorite was I would go up to somebody and say, do you listen to podcasts? They're like, do I need an iPod for that? And I was like, and then you'd explain what it was. You just need the internet and speakers. And then once you finally, they understood what it was, they're like, yeah, I don't do that. I'm like, okay, great. Never mind. So,
yeah, I feel like, even because I started podcasting in 2017 is when I first looked into it. Even then, people didn't have a clue what I was talking about when I was talking about podcasting. So I'm curious, though, especially since this podcast is so passion-based and focused in mental wellness and personal development.
Yeah,
people pursuing their passions. What was it about podcasting, even back then, that kind of drew you in originally?
Yeah, a friend of mine had come back from a marketing thing, and he said, hey. And again, this dates me, but I had kind of missed the MySpace boat, which was just ginormous at the time. And he's like, you know how you missed that? He goes, I've seen the next big thing. It's podcasting. And I Googled it, and there was 1.5 pages. And I was like, wait, how do you spell that? And he's like, dude, it's POD casting. And I'm like, okay, 1.5 pages. And so there just wasn't much out there. And when I kind of paper clipped one together with some shoestring and rubber bands, and I uploaded this file and saw it come down, the light bulb went off, and I turned a blog I'd been doing for musicians into a podcast. And within like a month and a half, I got a voicemail from this guy named Michael Van Laar from Nuremberg, Germany. And I remember listening to it, and my brother was right behind me, and he's like, did he say Nuremberg, Germany? And I was like, yeah. And I would just hit play, and I'd, hello, Dave, this is Michael Van Laar from, and I was like, wait, what? Because I'm in the middle of nowhere, Ohio. And there's some guy in Nuremberg, Germany that not only found my show, but liked it. And I was just like, all right, give me the flag. I claim podcasting in the name of Dave. I was just like, so that's when I was like, wow. And it's funny because my background's in teaching. So if you give a podcast to a teacher, they're like, oh, we can all learn from each other. And if you give a podcast to a salesman, they're like, man, I can make a lot of money with this thing. And if, depending on what your why is and how you want to use it. But I just realized initially, like, wait a minute, this is like global. I knew it was global, but when you hear somebody coming out of your speakers from Germany, you're like, oh no, this is global. Like, that's not a lie. So that's what really threw me back in my chair.
Yeah, kind of differentiator from radio,
Yeah.
right? Being super hyper local.
Yeah, because you got to remember back then, now everybody listens to, I just go to the website for the radio station and hit play, or I listen on some service or whatever, or in their app. Back then, radio was like, you're as strong as your signal. And that was about it. So there wasn't a lot of listening online yet.
Right. Well, thanks for breaking that down for us. And I'm also curious about the music side of it. I'm a musician too. I'm a beatboxer and singer and guitarist. I'll actually do some beatboxing for you kind of near the end of the episode.
Excellent.
But curious about what passion was there for music too, and how that's mixed with podcasting.
Yeah, the bonus of it is I started to play the guitar when I was 5. I tried to, and my fingers were too small, and I was left-handed. And after not being able to get a baseball mitt or scissors when I was 6, I was like, okay, enough of this left-handed stuff. I'm done. And I just switched. And then my brother, I had a little plastic guitar, and I was really trying to learn. And once I switched from being left-handed, because it was trying to kind of learn guitar in a mirror, everything was upside down and backwards. So once I switched, and I did like everybody else did, I played Jimmy Crack Corn and I Don't Care and all that stuff for a while. And then my brother started playing AC/DC and stuff. And I was like, wait, how are you doing that? And he showed me bar chords, and it was like somebody just flipped a giant light switch. And I'd go to school, come home, and I would play until dinner. And then after dinner was over, I would go downstairs and play for about 3 or 4 hours a night. That's all I did was play the guitar. So over the years, I've been in heavy metal bands. I've been in country bands, which I still think was like one of the signs of Armageddon. And then the last band I was in was kind of a blues swing band. And then everybody got married and had kids, and that was the end of that. And I play in my church occasionally, but that's it. But it really, because I knew sound systems, I ran the sound for the band and things like that. So I had a microphone sitting around. And so I think that was one of the first thing, because people are like, which mics do you get? I'm like, well, I got an SM58 sitting right here, and got a
That's
bunch
what I started with.
Yeah. And I got a bunch of connectors and ended up plugging it into my computer and was like, okay, all right, I can hear myself. And you just kind of go from there. And like most people, my first episode is absolutely cringeworthy. And, that's, you got to start someplace. So
it is cool though when you get, it's awful when you hear yourself and you feel cringe, but it's cool because you know that you've grown so much. And that's the thing, is it takes putting in those reps just for years in order to grow, which is a good segue into kind of one of the first questions I wanted to ask you, which is, what's one of the biggest lessons you've learned about yourself with podcasting, but also what typically people in general struggle with?
Yeah, some of it is about learning about myself was overcoming imposter syndrome, because I was kind of like, well, who am I? Because I had seen where they were saying membership sites and podcasting are going to be the next big thing. So I went Reese Cup, and I'm like, well, let's put those together and create a membership site about podcasting. And I had been doing this podcast for musicians. And at the time, there's a guy named Bob Baker who was like the godfather of music marketing. His book's in the movie School of Rock with Jack Black. And wow. I remember thinking, well, it'd be great if I could have Bob on the show. And I'm like, but who am I? And I asked Bob, I'm like, and I think Bob had actually sent me something because he had heard my show. Because again, back then there were like maybe 100, podcasts. So if you search music marketing, I kind of came up, and I was like, man, I can't believe Bob Baker listens to my show. And I interviewed him, and I go, well, how did you become such, like, you are the godfather? And he's like, well, I had played in bands, so I knew about that, and I knew about marketing, and I knew how to write. He's like, so I started a newsletter, and the next thing you know, everybody was reading it. And I go, oh, that's kind of wild. And he goes, so if you need to be a guru, just grab your invisible wand and just boop yourself in the head and go, okay, I'm a consultant now. He goes, and I've heard this a lot, you just need to know a little more than your audience. And in fact, I've helped people do shows where they don't know more than their audience. And I call those a journey show, where it's like, hey, I remember Joanna Penn did a show called The Creative Penn, because that's her last name. And it was all about how to be an independent writer. And when she first started, she had no clue. And so that was, man, probably 15 years ago. Now she is the independent writer guru, but you got to listen to her along the way, learn this and learn that and that whole 9 yards. So you don't always have to be the guru, but it is something that I just was like, well, who's going to listen to me? And so the thing that kind of started me on that was I was doing blog posts before I started the podcast. And I had people said, you should put these into a book. And just that kind of was like, I'm saying things that people find value in. And so just those little nudges. And I was like, and I had missed the MySpace boat. I'd missed a bunch of stuff that you're just like, you see it go by and you're like, should have bought Apple stock, or whatever it was. And right. I just, when this came along, I was like, I'm not going to let this one go by. I'm going to jump in the boat and see what happens. And I had no idea what I was doing. And this was back before there were things like Teachable and Thinkific, and you would buy this script and have to load it on your own server to make a membership site. I mean, it was ugly. And I just remember, you'd get the directions and you're doing everything via FTP, and all of a sudden, first of all, you spend a night trying to figure out why it's not working, and you find out later that you just spent 4 hours figuring out that there were 2 commas instead of 1, and you got rid of the 1, and poof, your website's back, and you're like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. But those are the things you learn, and you just, as you go, you're like, oh, like you need friends too that tell you the truth. And I had a friend of mine when I first started off. I was like, man, if I could get, I don't know, 200 people to give me $5, I mean, that would be amazing. Right, because you're thinking it's the internet. And I had a friend call me up, and he's like, "Hey, how's the School of Podcasting going?" I'm like, "Well, it's slow." And he's like, "All right, I got a question for you." And I go, "What?" And he goes, "Can you name anything on the internet that has value for $5?" And I was like, "No." And he's like, "Exactly." I go, and I was like, "Oh," and it was funny because then I raised it to 20, and I had people sign up, but they weren't doing anything. They were just giving me $20. And they'd be like, yeah, I'm going to get to it. And I was like, well, my business model was you start a podcast, and then people will go, hey, where'd you learn how to podcast? And you go like, you need to go see my buddy Dave. And I'm like, if you're not making a podcast, that doesn't work. And so over the years, I've just kept increasing it until I found the right amount to where people sign up, they actually make a podcast. And, again, you just live and learn as you go through.
Amazing. There's so much that we could unpack with that, but kind of 3 main points that I loved, and it's going to be what I clip later and share on social media too. But it's the part about the imposter syndrome, overcoming that, and then the journey shows style, and then having good friends, a support system to kind of help you see those things that you wouldn't see yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I had another guy that said, hey, Dave, I got somebody that went through the School of Podcasting. I got some feedback. And I'm like, perfect. And he goes, well, the good news is everything you need is in the School of Podcasting. And I'm like, great. I go, what's the notes? What's the bad news? He's like, everything you need is in the School of Podcasting. Because everything I found,
overwhelming.
It was just like, and he said, really, people just want you to go, this is what you need to do. And I'm like, well, I'd like to go look. Do you want this microphone or this one or this one? And he's like, nope, just tell them what to do. And I was like, okay. So I still have kind of 3 paths, which I probably shouldn't, but it's like, hey, if you're on a really tight budget, go this way. If you got a little budget, go this way. And if budget is no problem, go this way. But again, you need people to tell you the truth because, I just was laughing. The church I go to, we've had a logo on our website for about 4 years that had a typo in it, and nobody caught it. And you're just too close to your own stuff. And so you need somebody to come in and go, Dave, what? You have spinach in your teeth. Oh, dang it. So.
Love that. Well, and as far as like getting it in front of the right people, what kind of strategies have you done? I mean, so you mentioned setting the price point to one that seemed to work, but was there a way that you initially promoted it? Was it through the blogging?
Yeah, through blogging. I had a newsletter, and then the first podcast event was in Ontario, California, and it was interesting because it was brand new, and everybody knew everybody because there were only, maybe 100 podcasters, and it was like an episode of Cheers. I remember it was in a Holiday Inn, and we're in the bar, and somebody would walk in and go, "Hey, anybody know where the podcast thing is?" And we'd be like, "This is it." And they would be like, "Who are you?" And I remember there was a guy named CC Chapman that did a music show. And he's like, "Oh, I'm CC Chapman." And the whole bar was like, "Oh, CC, what's up, buddy?" So that was, so just right there, networking. And, I always say it's not so much who you know, but who knows you. And so I always, anytime I can get in front of people that are trying to get exposure. I went to a thing at the library once, and they were talking about SEO. I'm like, oh, those are people that are trying to get traffic to their website. I know a way to get traffic to your website. Start a podcast. And all I did was at the end, they're like, do you have any questions? And I said, yeah, hi, I'm Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting. And then I asked a legitimate question, but I said podcasting, and I had 3 people come up at the end of that, like, hey, are you the podcast guy? And I was like, so it's really figuring out who your audience is. And the answer is not everybody, but figure out who that is, go to where they are, and then make friends with them. I remember once, again, gray hair here, but I found a forum. So this is pre-Facebook, and it was ex-radio DJs. And I swear I heard like angels. It was like, oh, and I was like, oh, this is my audience. And I ran in there and I was like, hey, I'm Dave Jackson. I can get you back on the air. It's a global audience. Everybody follow me. Let's go podcasting. And they're like 20 minutes. I was banned. They're like, kick him out. Who is this spamming idiot that's, just come in and buy my stuff? And I was like, oh yeah, there's a lesson to learn. Maybe make friends with them first and then tell them about what's going on, So
love that.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. So I did radio for 5 years too, 4 or 5 years.
Nice.
And it's so true how many of radio DJs just we love this kind of stuff, but just sometimes you got to maneuver around and make changes to something like podcasting, which is so much more beneficial these days.
Well, and I think every radio guy should have his own podcast, because we know radio, the minute they change the format, you're out. And when you're trying to find a job and you say, oh, by the way, I also have a podcast that have, 500 weekly listeners. They're like, oh, okay. So I'm bringing my audience to me. So that might be a way to help you get hired.
Well, hey, thanks for everything you've broken down so far. I think it's a good segue too to like your books and ROI. I've got a question that I get a in this community. The question is, how can someone stay true to themselves and create authentic content while also building a podcast that brings in income, especially if they don't have an audience yet? So it's kind of an ROI question.
Yeah, the thing is, you don't monetize a podcast. You monetize an audience. And so when you go, I don't have an audience yet, well, then don't focus on monetization, because you're just wasting your time. And so what you should focus on is finding out who is that person, because people bust out the wallet when you solve a problem. Like, hey, I've got a headache. Oh, you have aspirin? Take my money. Okay, I don't know how to fix my car. You do? Take my money. Think about the thing. I'm hungry. Oh, you have food? Take my money. And sometimes it's a little harder, but I've had a bad day at work. Oh, you can make me laugh? Take my money. So that's really it. But when it's just like, oh, I talk about, I interview interesting people about interesting things. Okay. And what does that do for the audience? Now, it might inspire them, and maybe they need inspired, but you have to solve a problem or help them in some way or another. So that's the thing. So really focus on who is my audience, because when you can give them what they want, then they start telling their friends. And that's about 70% of the time how a podcast is grown, is via word of mouth. And so, and nobody likes this number. And I did a lot of research, and I just heard it again on another podcast. When people start making money, it's around the 3-year mark. And they like, wait, it's not 6 weeks or 6 months? Like, nope, it's 3 years. And there's a book called Beyond Powerful Radio. She says 3 years. It's just one of those where to make car payment money, if you're really, really good, and there is this thing called luck that comes into it too. But if you're brand new, there are ways you can make money. It's just not a ton, like affiliate marketing. I know I did a show. It was funny. Jillian Michaels is this trainer, and there used to be this TV show called The Biggest Loser. And she quit The Biggest Loser and started a radio show. And they turned that into a podcast. And it was great. It was Jillian being Jillian. And then she must have got a bigger size check, and she went back to The Biggest Loser. And everybody was looking for the Jillian Michaels podcast, except there wasn't one because she was on TV now. So what did I do? I made a Jillian Michaels podcast. And I said at the very beginning, I'm not Jillian Michaels, but I love her. And today we're going to talk about, because this poor woman put her name on everything, and everything had affiliates to it. And so I remember she came out with an Audible book, and every time somebody signed up at Audible, I made $15. And this was the very first time Jillian had ever read her own book. And I had listened to it. So never talk about something, like don't recommend something you didn't just use or eat or smell or something, because that is the definition of selling out. And I said, it's a really good book. And this is the first time that Jillian's read her own book. And you can get it for free now by using my Audible link. And 15 times, and I got like a 4-figure check on that. And I was like, okay. And then I was doing a weight loss show for a while, and there was a tool that I used. So again, look around your room. What are you using that maybe your audience might use? And I found this app called Chronometer, and it was way cool, and it was cheaper than MyFitnessPal, which everybody knew. So when I said, hey, it's better and cheaper than MyFitnessPal, and I think I made $1.50 if somebody downloaded the app and created an account. But by the end of the month, I had like $300. I'm like, well, that's a small car payment. I'll take that. But it's not a matter of like, what's the one strategy? It's how many strategies can I have? Because the more hoses that are going into the pool, the quicker it fills up. So I had things like affiliate marketing. There's always PayPal. When in doubt, you just say, hey, did you get value from this show? If you did and feel like giving some of that value back, go to mywebsite.com/thanks. And there's your PayPal button. And the bad news is, that's the good news. The bad news is maybe 3% of your audience might actually chip in, but that's another stream of income. And then the best way is consulting and selling your own stuff. So like there will be places that say, oh, you can make money from day one. And you can, but it's 0.003 cents a download. Or if it's $5 per 1,000 downloads, it's 0.005. And I said, look, if I sell a book behind me, it's $12 profit in my pocket. I go, or I could get 2,400 downloads. Which one is easier? 2,400 downloads or selling one book? So selling your own products and services is by far the most profitable thing. And when you show up on a regular basis, whatever your schedule is, and you deliver content that they go, oh, that was really good. And then when you do that, then you're seen as, I like that guy. Hey, she's pretty good. And when you're consistent with your schedule, you're seen as reliable. And then, when your content is good and they go, I'm going to try that thing. And they did, and it worked. Well, now they trust you. So it's the whole know, like, and trust. And so when you say, hey, I got a new book, or I've got a membership, or I've got a thing, or whatever, it's a much warmer lead than just somebody that's never heard of you. So it's, it's not easy. It's kind of simple, solve a problem for them and they'll give you money, but it takes a while. And again, you don't monetize a podcast, you monetize an audience. And a lot of times we get focused on the monetization instead of I need to build the audience first.
Wow. Love that. Thank you so much for the breakdown. Seriously, everyone listening, make sure you rewind that, you clip it, you save it, because that was gold. That was a masterclass in monetizing, and I love how you put that, monetizing with an audience and not monetizing the podcast itself, and just having all the options available, right? Like it's maybe a little strenuous at first to set up, but having all the options available for people to support you, and then being vocal about that and having a clear problem you solve. I mean, that was a masterclass breakdown. So thank you so much for that.
It was funny because in my head, I'm like going, I need to shut up. I could talk for about another 2 hours on this, but it's time to let Parker ask another question. I was like, okay, that's enough of that.
That's the podcast way of thinking that you're thinking is like having that internal time clock.
Yeah.
That's funny. Well, and definitely I'd encourage people to check out your books. I'll make sure to put those links in the description and stuff of this show. But also I wanted to ask you about Podpage and some of the website stuff that you're working on. And you mentioned in your breakdown a couple times too, the importance of people being able to go to a website to support. And so what is it that you're doing there? And maybe do they have an affiliate program?
They do.
I would look into that.
Yeah, you should. Yeah. Podpage.com/affiliates is where, or I can't remember if it's affiliate or affiliates, but try one of those will work. And yeah, so Podpage, if I back up just a pinch, I ended up getting a job at Libsyn. Why? Because of my podcast, because I knew the guys at Libsyn. I'd had them on my show. And so when I lost my teaching job, I said, man, I'd love to have a job in podcasting. So I reached out to Rob Walsh and I said, hey, the good news is, the bad news is I lost my job. The good news is I'm available to work for you. And my reputation had been built through my podcast. So I worked at Libsyn for 8 years, and then this job at Podpage came up, and I love Libsyn, love everybody over there, but this was just such a better fit for me. And so, yeah, Podpage will build a website for you, basically from your feed in about 10 minutes. You go in and pick the color and a couple layouts, and we integrate with everything. So like, we're not going to be MailChimp because they're MailChimp, and we're not Buzzsprout or Captivate or Libsyn, but we integrate with all those people. And we'll bring in your newsletter, and we'll import your videos from YouTube. And then we have a guest form that you can fill out. And when people fill it out, when that guest comes on the show, you just attach it to the episode and it goes right into your show notes. And we have a voicemail system because all podcasters want, engagement from their audience. So it's just
that's been one of the hardest things too, to have. Podcasting can feel so lonely and like you're not talking to the audience. So that's an awesome feature right there.
Yeah. And so I just love it because it was funny. The owner, Brendan Mulligan, is the main programmer and the owner. And he hired me in 2020 as a podcast consultant and said, hey, I got this idea. Do you think this would work? And I'm like, well, we need a contact page and about page in our episodes. And he came back in like a week and was like this. And I was like, that's amazing. And so over the years, he's kind of built Podpage the way I recommend to build a podcast, which is find out what your audience wants and give it to them. And that's kind of what he's done. And then so last year, he kind of said, hey, like, I got this position over here. You interested in all? And I thought about it and made the jump and been happy as a pig in mud ever since. So it's a really cool tool. But the thing that you mentioned about having a website, we're doing a thing right now, and I had to reach out to a bunch of people and say, hey, can we have a meeting? And I just needed to contact them. And some people had websites, but even that, some of them were like, oh, slide into my DMs on Instagram. And I'm like, everybody uses email. Not everybody uses Instagram or whatever you're using, or I don't want to set up a discovery call with you. I just want to ask you a quick question. I don't want to waste your time and I don't want to waste mine. But then there were people, they'd be like, oh, I can help with that. And I'm like, great. What's your website? And they're like, yeah, I don't really have one. And I go, wait, what? And they're like, no, like I get most of my work. I've been lucky. I've done most of my work just by referrals. And I'm thinking, if you're that good, think of how much more business you would have if people could find you, So, and I'm not talking about a Linktree thing because that has zero SEO, and it doesn't have to be this, $10,000 website. It just needs a place for people to contact you, a way, if you're doing podcasting, a way to follow the show, maybe a newsletter, things like that. And it's one of those things because what happens is your show notes are words, which is exactly what Google loves. So you get found in a search, people come over, they click on play because there's a player there. And Google's like, that's really weird. Every time I send somebody over to Parker's website, they're there for like 18 minutes. Like, that must be really good stuff. So it boosts your SEO. But if it's a, whatever, Linktree or link in bio, some sort of tool like that, that's just a bunch of links, they come over and they're like, oh, and they click on it and they go away. And so your website is getting zero SEO. So I know it's, sometimes we're doing stuff on a budget, but, even if, first of all, go bowling this weekend, see how much that runs, or go golfing. Or even if you're like, I just like to run. Running is my hobby. Okay, great. How much did you pay for those shoes? And so many people try to do it on the cheap and try to do it for free. And I get that. I've been broke before, so I get that. But there are times when you're like, no, it's if you're going to do this seriously, it's time to get a website.
Right. It's worth investing in these kinds of things. And you could spend $3,000 on a professional website, or you could have something like this that gets the job done, that's, more affordable. And I think it's very beneficial. I'm so glad you said what you did about SEO. That's kind of my bread and butter, so to speak. When I was in a tough time, back up against the wall, didn't have money, I had kind of a quick story real quick, but I had a video go viral in 2015, 2016, launched me into motivational speaking and touring the country,
Nice.
speaking and getting paid. And then when COVID came, it was all done. All my events stopped. And I was like, what am I going to do? And so I started offering podcast services because that's what I knew to do.
Yeah.
And knew I could make some money with that. So I started finding clients to do their podcasts, and all of them wanted like the Instagram reels, the clips, all those things. But something I found a space in was SEO. I'm like, hey, people are going to Google you though. And I'm passionate about writing and doing SEO and keyword optimization, and helping people set that up and stay consistent with their websites via their podcasts and having blogs and so much content from their podcasts. So it really is a great strategic move that I think is underrated, because everyone's so much in the realm of social media only.
Well, that, or they'll go, well, AI, ChatGPT or Perplexity, and they go, yeah, but what are they using? They're using search results behind the scenes. I'm like, you still got to rank higher to get into those kind of results. So yeah, absolutely. SEO is important.
Well, thank you so much for that. I think we're going to probably wrap up here with a few more questions, but one thing that I'd love is another story, if you had one,
Sure.
on maybe a time that you just felt like your life changed because of podcasting for the better, or maybe when you saw that happen in someone else, where their podcast literally transformed themselves or their businesses. I know you mentioned, was it Joanna Penn?
Joanna Penn. Yeah.
Joanna Penn. Yeah, I loved that. And I think anything along those lines would be so inspiring to hear.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I've been hired 3 times because of my podcast. I got hired at a college to teach, because during the interview, they're like, what do you do for fun? I'm like, oh, I play the guitar, I ride my bike, and I podcast. And like, you do podcasting? And that, I'm pretty sure that's what got me the job. I got the job at Libsyn. I got hired to be the head of podcasting at the New Media Expo, which at the time was this huge conference, so it does do that. But I think it's hard to pick one. The Corner podcast, and I can see his face, and I'm totally blanking on his name. I want to say Blake, but that's not it. But anyway, this guy started off, he just wanted to talk to other corners. And it's, and so he started the show, and Drake, I'm getting there, Darren Dake, there we go. I knew it was coming. And he started that, and then he got asked to speak at a couple places. And then he ended up getting a job as like the head of something in his state that had to do with corner stuff. And then he was like, huh. And so he started a course on how, because apparently you have to keep up with being a coroner. So he started this thing to keep your credits up in like the basement of a church or something, that this church or whatever. And that led to some like, hey, this is really taken off. And again, I just want to talk about coroner stuff. And he lucked out. Like, again, sometimes it's just luck. And he started moving it online in 2019 and got done right at the end of 2019. Well, 2020 rolls around, hello, COVID. And the fun thing is people still need to keep their coroner stuff up, but they can't go anywhere. And I asked him, because it used to be he would tell me how much he was making, and he doesn't do that anymore. He's like, nah, it's kind of like, that's, I'm like, okay, he's making, I got to keep it close to the vest. So he's a guy that, that was, just started off. And I think that's one of the keys is when you start off just for fun, there's no pressure. Like when you try to monetize too quickly, then you're like, oh, I only got 23 downloads and I'm not making any money. Where he was just having fun, talking about dead people, what dead bodies or whatever you do.
That industry.
Death scene investigation. Yeah. And so there's that, but you also don't realize how much you impact your audience. One of the things that really blew me away was I'd been podcasting for, I don't know, a couple years, and I get this email from a guy, and he said, hey, I just want to let you know, my best friend of 20 years passed away suddenly. My job of 20 years went away suddenly, and I was about 90% sure I had cancer. And I had decided that my favorite holiday is Halloween, and I was going to take my gun on Halloween. He goes, but I heard your show, and you said sometimes having a podcast can give you purpose. And I thought, I'm going to start a podcast. And he goes, and I now credit you with saving my life, because he goes, I went and got some help, obviously. And he goes, but I started this podcast and I'm having a blast. And it turns out I didn't have cancer. And, I ended up with another job, et cetera, et cetera. He goes, I was ready to just end my life. And I'm like, look, I'm talking about bandwidth and microphones and storytelling, and this guy comes back with, oh, by the way, you saved my life. And I was like, wait, what? And so I was talking to some people once at an event, and I have my buddy Ken Blanchard, does a show called Speak Life, and he's a veteran, and he's also a pastor. He's a brilliant guy, and he always signs off his show. He's like, oh, by the way, I love you, and there's nothing you can do about it. And because he's talked about his military background, he's had a bunch of guys from the military that are in those kind of situations where they're just about ready to just end it. And he's like, look, I'm not trained in that. He's like, I should probably get some. So yeah, it can affect you in so many ways, but can also, it's amazing. You think you're just talking into a microphone into the void. Then you find out later that, I had somebody come to Akron, Ohio, which is where I'm at. And he said, do you remember how you used to sign off your musician show? And I go, dude, I don't remember what I had for breakfast, let alone what I said 20 years ago. I go, well, what did I say? And he said, you would say, for those who have money, there's therapy. And for the rest of us, there's music. And I was like, I said that? That's not bad. And he's like, well, I'm now a professor at a college. And he goes, and I start off every semester with that quote. And I'm like, well, who knew? I'm like, thanks, man. That's cool. So you just don't know who's listening and, what's going to pop up. And we have a saying at the School of Podcasting, nobody's going to punch you in the face. So if you start a podcast and it's not really what you wanted, it's not as successful, well, you've actually learned something. You're much better at creating content than you used to be. You're probably more confident, and you're better at, just being yourself and a little more confident. So, yeah. So that's those are some people that have been affected, both myself and others, and your listeners.
Thank you. Yeah, you learn a lot, and thanks so much for sharing those impactful stories. It is wild. I like to call those full circle moments where, 99, I was literally telling someone this earlier today in just a voice memo, but like 99.9% of the time we don't get to hear back about it, right. But it doesn't mean it's not happening. And then those times that you do get to hear back about how you've impacted someone are very, very special. And it's what fuels creators and people like us to keep going. But also, yeah, it's encouraging to anyone listening right now who has a vision and wants to get started with something or improve what they're working on, to know that they're having an impact. And that's a lot of the time the reason for all of this. Sure, money monetization is great, but being able to have that impact, even if it's kind of unknown, is really sweet. Another thing I kind of point out oftentimes is how we, in our analytic dashboards, we have likes, impressions, comments, but there's nothing for like lives changed or lives saved or impact made. And that's, I think, important to put a spotlight on.
Yeah. Reduction of loneliness,
right.
Because there are people, there's a disease, and I just know it ends in spondylitis. It's a horrible disease. You're in pain all the time, and it wrecks your back. The guy from Motley Crue has it. It really jacks up your back. If you Google the phrase Ed Sullivan, he was the guy back in the 50s and 60s that had a TV show, and he's famous for introducing the Beatles. And if you watch the clip, he kind of goes, ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles, and his arm moves with his back because he can't really pivot. Well, he had this disease, and so I had a guy, I helped him launch it, and he said, you cannot put a price on the fact that you meet other people that are just as miserable as you are. He goes, which is sad to hear, but the fact that we're all doing it together, he goes, it's just a whole different ball game that, we're all kind of each other's cheerleaders and things like that. So like you said, it's not always about money and fame and things like that. There's a whole other thing I know people that do podcasting, they call it the best $19 therapy ever because they just want to get the word out there. So there's all sorts of reasons to start, but it all has impact.
I love it. Well, I appreciate the breakdowns. And my last question to you is, what do you think has been the most special takeaway from this episode that'll really help the listeners?
I'm hoping the spot on imposter syndrome, because that's really it's not the technology or the budget that stops most people. It's the thing between our ears. And my favorite imposter story, it's on Netflix. There's a thing on Garth Brooks, and he was going to play Central Park in New York City. And he's like, I'm a country boy. Ain't no city folk going to listen to me. And he's convinced that nobody's going to show up. It doesn't matter that they gave him the key to the city and here's your quadruple platinum and he's the best selling. It doesn't matter. All goes right over his head. And there's a clip where his wife says, I got to go out there, because he literally pulled all the curtains and just, locked himself in his room. And she come back and she's like, Garth, they had to move the barricades. He was like, ain't nobody here, is there? And his tour manager comes in and he goes, Garth, there's 890,000 people out there. And he's like, what? And he's like, yeah. And he goes, you're telling me there's 890,000 people out there? And he goes, no, Garth, I'm saying there was 890,000 people there 20 minutes ago. He goes, they're moving and by the time he went on, it was almost 1 million people. And the guy was straight up convinced nobody was going to show up. So imposter syndrome is normal. So if you're feeling that way, again, nobody's going to punch you in the face. Just, you're either going to end up with a great story about that time you started a podcast, or a great story about the time you started a podcast and it went nowhere, but you learned all sorts of valuable lessons. But so let's hear that beatbox, my friend.
I love that story. What I was just going to say, my favorite part of the episode, or where I got the most value, is right next to that, where you mentioned how not all shows have to be from an expert standpoint too. It could be from the journey and be valuable along the way. So
yeah. One other really quick one. If you're thinking about doing it, but you don't want to be on video, just remember, every book doesn't need to be a movie, So a lot of people get turned off by video. And I'm like, you don't have to do video. I know everybody, and that everybody is a company called YouTube that says you need to start video. So no, you don't.
Yeah, it helps with if you're doing the social media stuff, but that's not a must. You don't have to do that.
If you just want to start off with audio, perfectly fine.
Yeah, and those people probably will also excel with the writing and SEO and all the other things. So cool. Well, thank you so much, value. And I'm going to do a quick beatbox. Hopefully it doesn't cut out here since we're doing this virtual, but we'll give it a go.
All right.
Dave Jackson.
Dude, that's amazing.
Thank you so much.
That's pretty cool.